Good evening, everyone. It's lovely for me to be with you. I'm Joy Katzenguthrie. Welcome to our Palm Harbor Museum July Meet Me at the Museum virtual program. I'm delighted that you're here, and we have quite a few more signed up, so I'm sure we will have more coming in. But I'm just glad that you are here. We have a wonderful program that we will begin in just a moment with Professor Roger Block. But in the meantime, I would like to hand it over to our president, Bob Fortner, for any comments, any news you'd like to share with us, Bob.
Welcome, everyone. Again, delighted to be here with all of you, and thanks to everybody who puts effort into putting these programs on and keeping our museum going. As you know, we've started offering these programs free to get more people involved, but we also gratefully accept donations because donations are our prime source of keeping our operations going. That, along with some grant writing that Jean is working on and Terry's working on, and Anna and Carol, and appreciate all of you who put the effort into supporting the Palm Harbor Museum. That's basically what I have, other than what's in the newsletter. I don't need to repeat all that because that would cut into Roger's time. Again, I just appreciate, enjoy, especially I want to acknowledge you for all you do to host these programs and coordinate them. It certainly is a great gift for us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.
And thank you, Roger, for being here.
You bet.
I do want to mention, if you haven't visited the museum website lately, please do. I've put the link in the chat and also a link to donate online if you would like to donate or become a member, which you can do on the website. We're deeply grateful for that. That sustains us and makes these programs possible and keeps them going. I have also placed a link at the top. It says download resources. Well, that contains a handout that Dr. Block has created for us tonight, as well as a list of online resources that I have found, and you can follow those links to download more information yourself, as well as the video that I was playing before our program began as a prelude. You are more than welcome to go to that link. It is my Dropbox, but it will take you to Dr. Block's handout, and it will lead you to resources. And we'd really love you to have those, because the goal, as Dr. Block has said, is that he really wants you to not have to take notes, just be present and be part of the program. So let me take this moment to tell you a little bit about Professor Roger Block. He's a member of the Central Gulf Coast Archaeology Society for the last 25 years. He's past treasurer and president of that organization as well, a founding board member of the Trail of Florida's Indian Heritage. And by the way, the document for that is included in the list of online resources. He is past treasurer and president of that. He worked in and with Native Americans for over 30 years. He teaches courses in Native American history, heritage, and spirituality at St. Petersburg College and at Eckerd College in their OLLI programs for the last decade or more. And he's going to tell us all about the Tocobaga of Tampa Bay. We'll learn a lot of things I have a feeling many of us didn't know. So, Dr. Block, Roger, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's a real honor to be asked to participate in this Zoom meeting. And since we got a lot of information, let's get started, okay?
Okay.
Joy will be inserting images and that. Please take down either question and answers, and I'll try to get to them at the end. But you won't have to take any notes, because you'll get all what I'm talking about here and the images in this document. That after it's over, it'll all be at your call, beck and call through the Joy's process of linking in. Okay, so the Tocobaga is the name given by the Spanish, let's say, explorers. A lot of times they're considered conquistadors because they were looking for gold, and they were all military people. So, but let's say they're the explorers. It's a name given to this tribal group living in the Tampa Bay area. It was called the Tocobaga. And they had Spanish, some Spanish were captured by the Calusa and other tribal groups. And so that's how they found out about the name of this tribal group. It could have been the name of the tribe, or could have been the name of the chief. It doesn't matter. It's not clear. There's nothing definitive. It doesn't matter. The chief and his name may have been, and then it's recorded for history, and that's the end of it. So they were a fishing and hunting society ruled by a chief and sub-chiefs located in around 30 to 50 villages scattered around the Tampa Bay area. And the leading chief, whose name was Tocobaga Chile, lived in the large Indian village site we now know as Philippi Park. The remnants of that large Indian village site is in Philippi Park and Safety Harbor. Their regional rivals were, and sometimes enemy, but mainly just rivals for territory, were the Akali to the north of them and the Calusa to the south around Fort Myers. There's no really evidence that there was a major war. It was just Josh pushing back and forth for territory, for basically hunting and fishing territories. And Joyce put up this wonderful piece of art that Ted Morris has created for the past, called The Lost Tribes. And basically it shows the Tocobaga centered around Tampa Bay, with the Akali up near Ocala, let's say, and the Calusa down in the Fort Myers area, and then other tribal groups scattered around. And these are just the major tribes. There was all kinds of other smaller tribes of different names, but these are the major ones. And these are the tribal groups that were here pre-Spanish contact. So AD 1500 and mid-1500s is where what Florida looked like from a tribal viewpoint at that time. 900 to 1500, this is classified as Mississippian. It grew into this tribal culture, and it spread all across the Midwest. And maybe you can bring up that next diagram, Joy. The Mississippian culture encompassed the Southeast and all the way up, all the way to Texas, and all the way even up into Wisconsin, where I was born. This was a culture based on chieftain societies and had similar thoughts and art styles. They were all different tribal groups, but they had this basically a ceremonial complex. They all shared common beliefs in the supernatural and the their spirituality. Archaeologists, though, typically, they recognize this term Mississippian as a social, political, let's say, culture across all this wide region. But in Florida, archaeologists classify cultures like this based on their ceramics and their arts. So they discovered in Safety Harbor at the Philippi Park site, the headquarters of the so-called Tocobaga Nation, ceramic design is called Safety Harbor ceramics. And so you got these archaeologists that are looking at the material remains, and then you got other anthropologists that are looking at their political and spiritual environments. And so it's a little bit confusing if you get into this a little bit. This Tocobaga tribe, Mississippian culture, so to speak, had evolved in the Tampa Bay area from an earlier culture that existed and was discovered on Weeden Island in Pinellas County as well. Weeden Island culture was discovered out in that area of Pinellas County. It was a culture that existed from AD 200 to AD 900. And it was a culture that was ruled by priests, by spiritual leaders, not by chiefs. The spirituality was all omnipotent at that time. And so the priest, the spiritual leader, called the shots. He was like the key person in the culture, and then the rest were all everybody else. And that existed for that AD 200 to AD 900 period of time. And it was discovered on Weeden Island by the Smithsonian archaeologist Jesse Fuchs. And what was fantastic about that culture is that their burial customs were so powerful. They had burial mounds, and their pottery that they designed for burial with the bodies or with the skeletons was unbelievable. It was the finest ceramic culture that existed and has never been topped. Is the Weeden Island culture ceramics. And here's some examples here. Here's a effigy pot, a small clay pot from a burial that had various animals shown, like a bird effigy and some animal effigies, maybe a wolf. And then they had these fantastic pots that had all these unique images, what we'll call, nobody really knows what those are, but those were from the spiritual leader. Those were important images to have on a pot that was then, when the bone bundle was created, and we'll talk about that a little more later, they would then kill this pot by punching a hole in the base of it, and then that pot would be buried with this person, and it would, that the spirit of that pot or that creation would be carried into their afterlife. So it's a fantastic spiritual, let's say, routine that they developed in the Weeden Island culture, and that's what emerged into the Tocobaga culture at around 1500. So in summary, the Tocobaga tribe evolved into a chieftain society from a priest-led society over the 600 years from AD 900 to 1500. Why did that happen? Well, most archaeologists believe that the population was growing and the competition with the regional tribes around them was growing for resources. And it required them to go into a hierarchical society led by a chief, and you would have military warriors that would control the boundaries, and you had to have then a hierarchical society, not all common with it, like the priest, but you'd have to have a chief, and he would control the people, and he'd create warriors, and he would. So just like today, we have a hierarchical society in our civilizations now, from like presidents down to you and me. So it's logical that it was because of competition, and they had to protect their territories and hunting and fishing territories, and so they created this hierarchical evolution. So much of what we know about the Tocobaga derives, as Joyce said, I think, by what was written by by that video you showed, that the Spanish explorers, conquistadors, whatever, looking for gold, came and every expedition had a chronicler, a guy who would write the diary of the let's say the exploration. And so all these expeditions that came through Florida and on into America, there are diaries from these written scribes of the expedition leader, and then also it's we hear from these Spanish scribes what they saw, and when they talked to Indians, Native Americans there, they got a sense for what was all about the tribal area. But we also learned so much more from archaeology, of all our digs, all the digs throughout the Tampa Bay area. There must be 30, 40 major archaeological sites that have been evaluated now. And so archaeology sheds some light as well. Okay, so let's discuss now what we know about the Tocobaga from these two important sources, the Spanish diarists or chroniclers, and what archaeologists have unearthed up to now. And it is pretty well, that's it. There's not much new that's going to be discovered because these two resources are fairly extensive. The social system that existed now when the Spanish arrived, it was a chieftain society, hierarchical, with a head chief located at the safety harbor site in Philippi Park. His name was Tocobaga Chili, and then he had sub-chiefs scattered around the 30 to 40 other villages around the entire Tampa Bay area. So the society consisted of the chiefs and sub-chiefs, the fishers and hunters, and that's what we'll talk about. These are the people that provided the food. Warriors, so-called military people that would control the borders against enemy incursion on their territories. Captured slaves from these local Indian competitors, let's say, and a unique group of tribal male and female members who we name as two spirits, transgender, that existed in these societies, and they had a use in these societies. These were the people who called two spirits, who helped the priest prepare the bone bundles and the for burial. They were kind of like they were not. They were considered valuable, but not normal. Let's say they were different. Two spirits. They had two spirits in their home. They were sexually one spirit, and then spiritually or mentally another spirit. So that two spirit is a real neat way to look at it. And that's how Native Americans like to look at it. And they tended to the sick, removed the wounded and dead from any conflict or battlefields, and assisted the head shaman or priest in preparation for burial, preparing each bone bundle of the person who passed away. We'll go into that, how that was prepared in a moment here. But they were the helpers to the spiritual leader to prepare the bodies for burial in a future burial mound. And these bodies were stored in what we call a charnel house, just a separate house where there would be platforms, and these bone bundles would be stored until time to put them into a burial mound. The warriors function similar to what our police and military do now, is just maintaining order in the society, keeping the territory boundaries solid and firm, and then the police would maintain order in this hierarchical society. Per this one Spanish captive, there was a captive called Fontaneda. He was a teenage survivor of a Spanish shipwreck in the early 1500s, and he was 17 years a captive of the Calusa. And so when he went back to Spain and wrote up his notes for his diary, he stated that the chief of the Tocobaga was located at Safety Harbor, and his name was Tocobaga Chile. So here's another example of this Spanish recording diary of who the chief was at Safety Harbor. The tools that these natives used in the 1500s were bows and arrows, and actually spear throwers and darts, which is a tool from the Paleo people. Way back thousands and 10,000 years, the people hunting all the mammoths and mastodons and other large game in Florida were their main tool was this a spear with a spear thrower or atlatl. And even in the 1500s, the Native Americans in Florida had a spear thrower, and not the big spears. They didn't need them. They just small darts that they could throw. That was a variation on the bow and arrow was preferred because it's just more effective in carrying around and in using in hunting. And they would also, as they would use fishing nets. They would take nets out of either deer skin or other, or they could make twine out of various palm fronds, and they would then spring these nets and bring the fish into an area, and then they would you could go in, and the fish are swimming around in a small area. They could just get a basket, reach down in there, and pull the fish out. It was what was beautiful about that at that time around Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico was a absolute huge food source. There was so much fish and so much shellfish and all the seafood, and it was replenished every day. It would just come to your doorstep every day. So it was a food, let's say, locker that was unparalleled. And so they would make out of shell. They'd make scrapers, net weights, spoons, plummets, awls, cups, dippers, beads. The bone was much more plentiful for use in these tools than stone. The hunting as I said, the bows and arrows were very, very important. The pottery tradition was, as I said, the safety harbor. It was superb. It was good, but nothing of the class of the Weed Island culture, which was previous. And it's probably because that the Weed Island culture was focused on spirituality and sending a person's spirit to the other world, where these ceramics in the safety harbor were for use in cooking and storing food to maintain life in the present. The Tocobaga diet and major food was basically seafood. Shellfish was 40% of their diet. Oysters, clams, mussels, whelk, conch, scallops, crabs, shrimp. Fish was 50%, just a little bit more. Mullet, catfish, drum, jack, flounder, shark, and many other freshwater fish as well. Hunting was 10%, and they would hunt for manatee, deer, birds, bear, rabbit. But it was really the seafood that would, they have to go out and hunt these animals where the seafood just came to your doorstep, to your shoreline every day. It was fantastic. In the trash dumps that we'll talk about when we talk about village architecture, which are called middens, you find the bones of all these forest and seafood animals consistently through all the middens. So it was the bones were the waste, and the food that they ate off these various food sources in the seafood was what they ate, but then the bones were left in their middens. In Florida, very limited corn cultivation. Corn was prevalent, of course, in the rest of America, in Texas and the upper Midwest and throughout the Midwest, and stretching down into Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. But in Florida, corn was never adopted. They didn't need to. If they had all this great seafood, why did they have to go work on corn when they could just every day go out and catch fish, and it was healthier, much healthier than the corn was actually. But they didn't know that. So, and they would also eat hackberry, sea grape, plum, cabbage palm, and nuts like hickory and acorns from the forest. So, and they would make a bread out of beaten root sources from like the zamia plant. It was called kunti flour, and they would make bread, stylized bread out of that as well. So they were extremely, had a healthy, great diet of food from fishing and from some hunting, and then of course the all these various plants. They ate over 300 different plants, and I don't want to go through that list. Okay, the village architecture is important. The villages were always located near fresh water, of course. That really makes a lot of sense. So if you had a spring or a creek or a lake, there was a village usually near it, because that's where they got their fresh potable water. And what we see here is a diagram of the Anderson Narvaez site down off of Park Street here in St. Pete. I guess I don't want to try to change this. I will just talk to this. I don't want to change to the very record, but you can see here, this is a Mac Perry interesting diagram or a piece of art that shows what this site looked like when the Narvaez expedition came through here in the middle of the 1500 or 1528 was when he landed here. Notice that here there's a main midden, which is this. You can see. I think you can see there's this line I've written in here, which shows Park Street up to the upper part of the image, and then on this main midden, and the midden is what we call a trash dump, was a lodge that could hold over 300 people. So there was a sub-chief in charge of this particular village, and there was a large council house there. There was a dance plaza below the midden, heading out towards the Gulf. There was a ceremonial council hut on top of a large mound just to the north, and two burial mounds. One was out in the Gulf here. It was located, where intercoastal waterway would be now. But it was destroyed when the intercoastal waterway was created. At that time, the intercoastal waterway was important, so they just mowed down that burial mound to create the intercoastal waterway. And then over to the upper left is a burial mound where what I've indicated is where the Jungle Product Grill and Tap House is located now. But prior to that particular business being there, it was Saffron's Caribbean restaurant that was that was there for maybe 3 or 4 decades. And Edith, who created Saffron's Caribbean restaurant there, before she moved into that particular restaurant and created that, she had a shaman come out and make sure that it was okay for her to build and have that restaurant there, because she was concerned about any spiritual problems from sitting where that burial mound was located. So that's kind of an interesting story. Saffron's catered my wedding to my wife, and we knew Edith quite well. Okay, and notice there's a turtle pond here to the right, fresh water, and then there was a creek up here to the other side. Beyond this burial mound, there's a natural creek flowing out and flowing into the Gulf of Mexico right there. So this is a typical, let's say, Tocobaga village, and notice that I've highlighted where the Anderson home is located, item number 7. Happy Anderson believed that he should have minimal impact on this site, so he put his home on the dance floor, on the dance plaza, and the dance plaza was just where they danced every night, but there was nothing, no artifacts, no burials, nothing there that could be impacted by him building his house there. So he was very sensitive to Native American history and heritage. So it's kind of interesting how he integrated his home on this very important site. Most of these villages had these thatched huts that were scattered around, and of course the chief had the largest hut, but then he had all these larger thatched huts for council and for, that was the kind of building that was on top of these mounds and scattered around the village. The clothing, these clothing comments are written in the Spanish chronicles that the Spanish observed these Tocobaga people. The men wore breechcloths of matted plant fiber and deer skin every day. But on special occasion, they put on a cloak or what I call a jacket of deer skin over the shoulders and it carried down the mid thigh. That was their, let's say, their Sunday dress was when they would wear a cloak. Their hair was worn long and occasionally tied up in a knot on top of the head and secured by bone pins. Women also wore deerskin cloaks for special occasions and for spiritual celebrations. But their everyday apparel was a deerskin line, or call it a twine of deerskin, and they would drape Spanish moss, this hairy moss that hangs off of our palm trees, and they make a hairy skirt around their midsection, and so it would have been kind of an interesting environment to see these Indians in breechcloths and women in Spanish moss skirts, and just almost like an idyllic environment of natural people. Food acquisition, as I said, the bow and arrow was the key hunting tool. They would make 6-foot-long oak bows and a deerskin string, a bowstring. The Spanish could not, when handed a bow, the Spanish could not even pull the bow back. The oak was such a strong, let's say, bow, where the Tocobaga men could just pull it back as if it was nothing. So the Tocobaga men were extremely strong compared to the Spanish, let's say, explorers and even what I'll call military. Kind of interesting. They used these spear throwers and darts as well, and of course nets and hooks, and they dove for shellfish. They were very athletic, and they used dugout canoes. to go out into the bays and into Tampa Bay and into the Gulf to support their fishing. Here's a stone hammer. They call it a stone hammer. It's a whelk shell. This is a whelk shell, and the person who made this, who was an expert tool, part of the archaeological society here, he carved out this edge. You can see that there. There's an edge there, the edge of that shell, and then he drilled a hole up here, and then he created this oak handle, so we can shove through this, this handle through the notch underneath this structural element of the whelk, and then through this hole here. And then he takes a piece of rawhide or deerskin, wets it and ties it around, and then it shrinks and locks this shell permanently onto this handle. Then all he has to do is to take a stone and keep this edge sharp here. And so this now becomes an axe. You can cut down trees, palm trees, all kinds of trees with a pine especially. And so in this axis here, it's indestructible. It's like, it's as strong as steel. So they use shell very effectively in making tools. It's just a matter of keeping them sharp and hitting it at the right angle, so it exploits this structural element here. So these are, and when Terry Pendleton made this for me, which I asked him to do as part of my teaching, he said, "Do you want just something for show or something that can actually cut down trees?" I said, "Make me the real thing," and he did. And when I've given my presentations at Safety Harbor Museum to school groups, I've been hitting on a palm tree there, and I've almost succeeded in cutting that palm tree down because of this. This is like steel. This edge here. It goes right easily through palm, and through pine. It would be easily. Pine would be like butter to it. Village life and material. This is what's really important to realize. You get this feeling of all these Native Americans living in these villages in this idyllic setting of food abundance coming to the doorstep every day. But what really is, everything they made was all natural materials. And so all the structures, the council house, the charnel house, the family huts, the clothing, bowls, mats, instruments, everything, all the cooking, all of that is made of natural materials, wood and plant and animal parts. And all items need to be constantly maintained and repaired and replaced, because without this battle of maintenance, the Florida environment would turn everything into hummus in a matter of years. It just like we know it. The environment of Florida is tough on natural materials. So 50% of the activity of the village is maintaining the village and the tools and the houses and everything else. So 50% is getting food and 50% is maintaining the ability to get food. Tocobaga spirituality. They revered the spirit world and their natural world. And it was no different. The natural world was basically part of the spiritual world. So their ceramic pottery was decorated with all these images honoring their concept of spirituality of their natural world. They maintained a very strong legacy from the previous Wheeling Island culture. And they maintained the practice of secondary burials. Which means is that they didn't, if a person passed away, they didn't just throw them in a hole and in the ground like we tend to do in our world today. We bury them in cemeteries and that in caskets and other things. But what they did was they would, and we'll talk about that process in a minute. They followed the strict rules of secondary burial and preparation of peoples for burial based on the Wheeling Island spiritualism. With the help of the Two-Spirit people, and they were extremely useful. See, we tend to, I don't know, maybe I'm just wrong, but we tend, up until recently, LGBT has been really become powerful and in our society and important. And recognizing that who they are, but we think back then is that these people were considered extremely important and special, and so became the worker bees for the village shaman or holy man. He supervised the careful preparation of bone bundles for passage into the spirit world. The dead were defleshed by boiling the body and bones for 2 days. Ultimately, after 2 days of boiling over a fire and water, you ended up with a very clean clean bones. The bones then were all bundled and wrapped in a deerskin blanket and stored on a platform, which is now what is called a charnel house. At one of these thatched huts that we've seen, but on a platform, and those bundles would be just stored there, waiting to be buried into a burial mound. And it might take years to build up enough bodies to say, okay, now we're going to place these in the burial mound on top of our previous generation of people. And so every night, these bone bundles would have to be watched by I'll call it a teenager, a young person, to keep off animal predators from coming in and trying to get nourishment from these bones. So the teenage boys and girls would be there to guard the charnel house at night from predators. And then upon a time when they want to now take whatever in the charnel house and place them on the burial mound or in the burial mound, then they would create these ceramic pots to accompany them to the other world. And so very ritualization of burial, and very, very important in their mind of properly sending a person to the other world for eternity. It becomes a huge responsibility to do it right, because you don't, then that person's spirit, in their mind would wander away from all his ancestors and his family and all that. So it became extremely important to do it right. That's how they believed. What did the Tocobaga look like? The Spanish chroniclers or explorers referred to the Indians as giants. And we know they were strong because they could pull their bows back, and the Spanish, even the military guys for the Spanish could not hardly even pull the bow back. So there was a difference in strength and in difference in height. Of course, when you think of it, the Spanish were all they were military, pretty much military guys who got conscripted to go on this ship to go explore America, and they were small. they were not. They had suffered eons of time in Europe with fairly poor diet, and so they did not have. They weren't tall. They were short, stocky people compared to the Native Americans. Okay, so what did they look like? What did Tocobaga look like? Okay, there is a site down here on Tyrone Boulevard and Park Street North that is called the Bayshore Home Site. It was a large, it was a huge village back in the 8900. So before the Tocobaga and their culture came to be, this particular site was a late Weeden Island site. And it was a Dr. Snow in 62 was able to analyze 115 burials of 500 that were located in Bound B of the Bayshore Home Site. He was the first forensic archaeologist, which in other words, he was a doctor, and he was interested not in digging up pottery and points and tools and all that. He was interested in what these burials were all about. And so he looked at 115 of the 500 that existed in this mound. And he proved that it was a late Weeden Island site of 700 to 900. And look at the statistics here. Out of those 115 looked at, 33% were, let's say, were bodies that had died before the age of 12. Another 26 died before the age of 25. 22% died before age of 35. So 81% of the people in that mound that he looked at were dead before age 35. And all were dead by age 50. So let's just say early age mortality is shown here in this analysis. But that was true in Europe too. The people in Europe didn't fare any better. They all died young, and there were never any real elderly in Europe because of their diets and all the diseases they had going on in Europe. There was no medicine. This was before scientific medicine had been determined and developed and been effective. So early age mortality existed in the Weed Island culture here, and it continued on into the Tocobaga culture. So this is what Dr. Snow in his analysis, and I've got the paper here that he's written, of the Bayshore homes. And he found that he wrote this report up in 1962. The men, the Tocobaga men now, well, they were in this site in Pinellas County, but they were of the Weed Island culture period. The men averaged 5 foot 6.5 inches, 5 foot 6.5 inches tall. That was considered tall compared to what the Spanish were. The women, 5 feet 4.5 inches. They were tall as well. In fact, the women probably were taller than the Spanish military. But they aren't tall by our standards. But of course, our standards are now nutrition and medicine and all that, and it's totally different. All the men and women from what he saw on the bones, and he's a forensic anthropologist or archaeology. They all walked on the sides of their feet. He could tell that from the bones. He could tell that from the bone wear and tear, that they all walked on the side of their feet, not on the ball of their feet, the side of their feet. Strange. Their skulls were thick, higher, and wider than normal Native Americans. Well, what they did was they did skull shaping. This was true in the Inca and the Aztec and the Maya, but I had never heard until I read this report that Native America did skull shaping as well. In other words, when the child is born, a board is taped to the forehead, and over the next year or so, it gently pushes the skull flat and flaps it out and extends it to it widens the forehead to what they considered a more attractive, handsome feature, both on men and women. So the skull shaping was done, and so I had never heard of that before, but this is how this doctor proved this. Their faces were large, foreheads tall, noses moderate, jowls wide, chins deep. Very handsome features. They had strong teeth and no cavities, but all the teeth were worn down in half height because they were eating a lot of seafood and ingesting a lot of sand and chewing on seafood and other things, and their teeth got worn down to half height, and yet they had no cavities. Interesting. But almost every one of the bodies had evidence on the bone structure in the jaw that there was an infection going on underneath the teeth. In other words, the jaw was infected, but the teeth looked pretty healthy. Cool. Okay. Most of all the bones were covered by what he could see was remnants or signatures of a healthy fibrous membrane, which said that they had very high nutrition. The bones were covered by this membrane, which means that they ate a lot of plants and that they had healthy diets. Almost every skeleton showed signatures of osteoarthritis, degenerative joint disease in the lower back, pretty much. So that's kind of interesting. They all suffer from arthritis because they lived a very, very demanding physical life. Everyone, including the younger ones, the children, had signatures of inflamed skeletal lesions on their skulls. and their skull bones were kind of porous. That and what he determined, and he was correct, that almost everyone suffered from a non-venereal syphilis called endemic syphilis. There's a bacteria called Treponema pallidum that was existent in that culture, and it caused the bone structures to be kind of porous, and it caused signatures, lesions on their bones. You know, they were healthy, but they had on their bone structure this lesion going on that was not good. So I'll just say this, with no disrespect to Native American spirituality, and I personally believe heavily in Native American spirituality, the shake of a shaman's rattle would not cause this disease to go away. This was an endemic disease that everybody seemed to have, and it continued all the way into the Tocobaga era. So, yeah, the shaman's rattle would solve some light, let's say, diseases or illnesses, but the shaman's rattle had nothing to do with solving this problem of this endemic syphilis that was prevalent throughout all their tribal groups. They appeared strong, they appeared healthy from the diet of marine and seafood and plant nutrition, but their life way suffered a high mortality rate. As we saw, they were all dead before 50, and they all showed very much to have this endemic syphilis condition attacking their skeleton structure. So this was an 8,900, this was a late Weeden Island site. And this is Dr. Snow reporting in 1962, that this is what that particular tribe at that point showed in their skeleton. Could that have condition continued on into the Tocobaga regime of when the Spanish arrived? It could have. And this guy here, Dale Hutchinson at University of North Carolina, who is a claimed bioarchaeologist. He's a scientist that really looks at all this, not the artifacts, not the site plans. He looks at their bones and their health. And he now looked at, I think it was a dozen sites across Tampa Bay of the burials, and looked at all those burials, re-looked at them all. See, every one of these archaeological sites have been excavated and looked at and studied by a different archaeologist. Archaeologist who was interested in the ceramics and their life way. He looked at their health, and he re-looked at all the bone bundles and all the skeletons, and found that all this condition continued and even increased in going into Tocobaga. And it increased because the Tocobaga, the amount of people increased, and so the transmission was much more prevalent than scattered Weeden Island sites across the southeast. These were now villages, 30 to 50 in the Tampa Bay area, and with fairly high populations of people. And this particular endemic syphilis, which is transmitted by sharing common eating bowls and tools. It's transmitted. You have a family, you put a food down there, and they eat from it, and this endemic syphilis is transmitted to their family. Fantastic way he was able to discern that. Okay, so he also then has looked at that. They did a whole bunch of isotope signature ratios on the bones, and found out that he just proved that the whole diet was on fish and shellfish, with some supplanted by some land animals and some plants. The diet was exactly the same from Weeden Island all the way through Spanish contact. He also discovered that in looking at the bones, this sporadic hyperstosis, it's an iron deficiency causing spongy or porous bone tissue in the cranial, in the skull. It's caused by people eating undercooked seafood, and that was their main diet, is eating seafood. But if it's undercooked, then there's you get an infection in your dietary tract, which ends up as a condition in your skull. So it's an anemia. It's an iron deficiency anemia that ultimately attacks your skull structure. Osteoarthritis, he found that 20 to 50% of all the native, Tocobaga had osteoarthritis, just like the Weeden Island people did. Trauma, very limited signs of trauma on the bones, which means they didn't have big battles. They had maybe some family, social family, beating of people, conflict between brothers or man and wife, where somebody got hit, and on their skeleton there was a sign of trauma, broken bones, things like that. But no trauma that would indicate any warfare or fighting, military fighting. So it was all minimal trauma on the bones, which means that it was a relatively peaceful society, except for its family disputes. Infectious disease, though, he proved completely that this treponemal infection known as endemic syphilis existed all the way up and through Spanish contact, all the way through the Tocobaga. And it increased even more occurrence because of the increased population density of the Tocobaga. There's a wonderful rendition of art by Herman Trapman, a wonderful artist, and have a person here who concentrates on creating art like of Native American history in Florida. And this is his painting he calls The Beginning of the End. This is the Narvaez expedition landing in the intercoastal waterway around Treasure Island area. This Tocobaga village with the council house on top. And here's maybe this chief looking out and seeing, who are these people coming in this boat and this big canoe? And the children are wondering, what is all this about? This is starting the end of their life. This is going to be the end of their life. And we'll see why. The Spanish arrived in the 1500s, and the native population was, in my opinion, based on Dr. Snow's analysis and on what this new book by this Dale Hutchinson book showed, that they already were living at the edge of survivability. They acted strong, but they had all these diseases internal on their skeleton. The lesions throughout their whole skeleton are shown as marks on their skeleton. Their skull was porous and had this iron deficiency anemia condition. Yes, they were living, they looked strong and healthy, but they had this internal problem that they were surviving from. And then the Spanish arrived, and they bring in measles, smallpox, leprosy, scarlet fever, typhus, and venereal disease. And up until that time, there was no such thing as venereal disease in the New World. It was brought in by the people in Europe. So those diseases, on top of what the Tocobaga already were suffering, tipped the scales. And here's an example on this chart that I use in my classes when I give this. Here are three, on the top of this chart, three scientists who have made estimates of, and now this is not Florida, this is all America now, in 1492, when Columbus arrived. Three different professors, and they said, well, North America, one said around 4.2 million. Another guy says, no, maybe 12 million. And another guy named Snow, not the same doctor, 2 to 4 million. General consensus by most scientists now say 2 to 10 million across North America, Native Americans living when Columbus arrived. But they brought all these diseases, and for the next 150 years, these diseases went right through Native America because there's no medicine at that time in the 1500, no systematic medicine. By 1900, the US Census showed that in America, instead of being the 2 to 3 million or even higher, there was 250 people registered as Native American, a factor of 20 to 1 loss or 94% loss. But my contention is that the Native Americans that were here when the Spanish arrived were already near the limit of survivability, and all this did was tip the scale to where 95% loss. And right now, I think you can see it from this chart, is that there's about 3 million in America now, registered Native Americans. So they're coming back. On top of this, then, comes in the 1700s, Native groups up in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia in the southeast. These are Creeks, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and others are forced out of those states, and they come into Florida. They were being forced by the U.S. Military and government to try to go on a reservation. They came down into Florida because Florida basically was empty. They had a few of the Tocobaga who did survive, went out into the palmetto and the jungle and tried to survive out there. These Indians from what I'll call the north of Florida, the southeast, came into Florida and gathered up all those, whoever had survived. Northern groups coming down became known as the Seminole, and they absorbed what remaining Tocobaga had survived. And so the Seminole tribe officially says, we gathered up these remnants that became part of our tribal group. And so the blood of the Tocobaga runs in our veins. They claim that they have Tocobaga blood. Well, they do. They probably intermarried, but they were a very small amount of people. But they're saying the blood of the Tocobaga flows in our veins, because if there's any advantage they can have by saying, well, we're part Tocobaga, they'll take advantage of it. So anyway, it's a political thing. So the history of the Tocobaga in Tampa Bay is really not happy with. It was devastating. And yeah, I think they were already at the edge of survivability with the Spanish arrival. They were surviving, but they were not surviving in what I'll call a healthy state of affairs. And so that's what, and the new Spanish European diseases just basically wiped them out. So if you think that when the Spanish arrived, that as Herman Trapman's art typically shows, Joy has shown in the announcement here, a bunch of art that Trapman made of showing an idyllic lifestyle of fishing in dugout canoes and hierarchical chieftain society. But what was the village really like? Let's go through that. And so I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to paraphrase from a wonderful guy who's now passed, but Mac Perry. He was probably the most intelligent person I've ever met, because he was an artist, he was an archaeologist, he was a musician, he was everything. He was a Renaissance man per se. Anyway, so I'm paraphrasing what he said. Every Tocobaga village, think of it now, was a plethora of smells. The fish, as well as all the hunting prey that the hunters brought in, were butchered in the village, and in all the fish guts and the blood and bones of hunting animals were thrown on the midden. The midden was the trash dump. It was right in your village. So every element of organic and animal waste was tossed on the midden. Over decades, these middens built up, and it's a village of thatched huts and mounds and pyramids, but also all surrounded by the midden, which was the trash dump. And that's where you threw all your shell and your bones and your waste. So you can imagine over decades the smell of this waste in the Florida environment. It had tremendous odors. There was very little body hygiene used by these Native Americans. Of course, they go in a lake or stream or in the Gulf, and they could clean up. They lived a natural life. The odor from the resting dead bone bundles in the charnel houses would also contribute to this squalid environment. And you can imagine this, the literal clouds of unchecked pesky flies, gnats, and mosquitoes that existed in this world and preyed on this world were like a cloud of insects throughout the village. And then there was always a public latrine, a ditch someplace off to the side where they would go like a public latrine. They felt that all these odors were part of what life was all about. So when you think of that village and all the insects and the smells of the midden, which was all full of this waste of food, of fish and food, you can imagine what the village must have smelled like. It was their natural life. So when you reminisce about the Tocobaga, you got to be realistic. They were very vulnerable. In fact, I think they were near the edge of survivability, but they were all lost by the late 1600s. They were all gone. but their village sites, their ceremonial mounds, their dance plazas, their burial mounds still evoke their presence. That's still the evidence of their culture and their heritage, and their historic story of Florida is still evoked by their mounds, by their middens, and by their dance plazas. End of story. Any
Wonderful. But Dr. Block, I'd love to. You had provided a photo from the museum of a Tocobaga man, which I assume was an estimate of what he looked like. Would you like me to show that and talk about that at all?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Sure. I'll put those up because that was interesting. We see the varying images from artists don't quite look like this, but I assume this was the deer hide sort of Sunday outfit you talked about.
Yeah, okay. Let me tell you a little history of this. I'm a rocket scientist. I'm really an engineer. I was Honeywell Space Systems here for 30 years. They're chief scientists on all their aerospace work here. And I was one of their leading, and I was program manager for a while there too. Anyway, my hobby is Native American. I've spent 35 years working in and with Native America, doing all their ceremonies, talking to the elders. That's my passion. You got to have something besides engineering, and that was it. So I would give these classes at Echo College and St. Pete College and in various museums, and I would wear this outfit because I became then an artifact, the Native American artifact of the Tocobaga. Well, I created this deerskin cloak, and this is all very, very important Native American symbology on the spirit wheel here. And he's wearing bear claws. His spirit companion is the bear. He's wearing I can't own an eagle feather. That's only owned by Native Americans, so I have to use turkey feathers. And there's all these rules you have to follow. You can see he's got the alligator foot for his earrings here. And the alligator in Florida was very, very powerful animal, along with the bear, and so he would wear these symbols of the leading, let's say, animals of Florida: long hair, tunic. Okay, and notice that he's got a staff of office here with a beaver skull on it. That was one of his spirit companions that he would use as his advisor to help him make decisions. He would do all the burials. So notice around his on his cloak here, he's got these little skulls, and then that necklace is a bunch of carved stone skulls. He had to do the burials right, or those spirits would not go to the other world properly, and they would wander alone for eternity if he didn't do it right. He had a huge responsibility. And notice that he's got down on the bottom here on his anklets, he's got deer toenails on his like little bracelets here, and it would sound like this when he walked. So he had hands-free rattles, and when those rattles create a voice, it's calling the spirit world to hear my prayer, hear my lament. And so this was what I used in my class. Well, I did a 23andMe DNA analysis earlier this year, because I always thought, and everybody always asked the question, are you part Native American? And I always said, well, I don't know. But the way I've invested 35 years in this history and culture, I must be. I did the 23andMe analysis, and it came back very definitively. It said, notice there's a alligator foot right hanging off his necklace here, and a stone. See that stone point hanging on a necklace there, right in the center of his. That's critical. You always honor your ancient ancestors, because if they weren't there, you wouldn't be here. You're descended from them, and those are the paleo people back here in 10,000, 12,000 years ago. You always carried something to honor your history, the people that were here before, because they led to you. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I got my DNA analysis, and it said you're German, you're Irish, and all kinds of different things along the way. It got down to Native American, it says 0. zero Native American. But they said, but wait a minute. You have more Neanderthal DNA than 85% of everybody in America. You are of the top 15% of having all this Neanderthal DNA. And my wife said, I didn't need them to tell me that. So anyway, so I retired this outfit because I don't have the Native American heredity or DNA. And I would feel absolutely not right wearing this outfit. I always use this excuse, well, I think I must be because I'm so impassioned by their culture and their history. But now that I know I'm not, I had to retire this to this mannequin here in the Seminole Historical Museum. And it's a good prop for telling what a Tocobaga man might look like. And look at behind him is a Seminole tribe of Florida, fancy jacket that they wear. Anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. That is
for sharing that.
an interesting story.
Where is this museum?
Okay, this is a neat little, and I haven't been to your museum, and I plan to come up there shortly. But anyway, this is in Seminole City Park, right in the city of Seminole. It's a beautiful little boutique museum. It's got the history of Seminole and Pinellas County and all the farmers and the settlers that were here. And then it's got all kinds of memorabilia from the city and all that. And it's got a tremendous collection of ancient, large Paleo era bones of mammoths, bison that were dug up, in a big dig here many years ago by University of Florida archaeologists. No city museum has that collection of bones from these. They dug up a watering hole that they found, and they found all these huge bones from mammoth and bison and all the other big time large animals from the Paleo caveman era. And after Florida archaeologists analyzed all those, they put them in a warehouse up there in Gainesville because they don't have any place for them. Well, we petitioned, say, well, we have a place for them. You still own them, but let us display them here for the city. And they said, go for it. So we had the pick of the whole thing, and no city museum has those bones, the real bones of mammoths and mastodons that lived here and died here in that sinkhole.
We love to support our fellow museums, so I put the website to the museum up there. And I will open the floor. If any of you wish to ask a question, you are welcome to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask if you have anything you would like to ask Dr. Block.
And I'll try to answer it.
We've given us so much information. It's been quite wonderful.
I know it's been a water hose, but I think the text that you have now available to read, you can go sit back and read that at your leisure. And I think it tells a decent story of what the Tocobaga were like and how they ended their existence here due to all kinds of, let's say, medical issues.
So in other words, they probably wouldn't have survived much longer anyway, you feel, or a scientist
but you can see this. We all know because of COVID, we're all now really sensitive about the immune system and how it works. And so when your immune system is tied up with trying to conquer what they had, which was this endemic syphilis,
yes. and even on children, diseases. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And arthritis and everything else was there. And then on top of that come all these new diseases from Europe, which they had absolutely no immunity to. The whole immune system was swamped. And that 95% of Native America went into evaporating.
Does the fact that they use the blocks on the head shaping, does that lead scientists to think they came from the Mayan or the South American culture? And
no, I think what I've read is that this was a practice in South America for the Inca, and for in Central America, in Mexico for Maya and even Aztec, it was a cosmetic. It was strictly cosmetic to create an image of your face that the shape of your skull that apparently was viewed as attractive. And so the Inca would bind the skull so that they had this long, almost like a 2-meter skull. And in the Maya, it was a flat forehead receding back was considered regal, let's say. And then apparently in this Native American world, both men and women thought that a wider forehead was an attractive look. Mm-hmm. And so they did that. You can do that when a child is young, and all it does is it shapes the skull to a certain point, and then you remove it, and it becomes your skull for life.
Okay, but that itself doesn't damage the health.
Not at all. Not at all. Because the skull is very pliable.
Pliable at that age.
Okay. Yeah. And it wasn't really tight. It was just a gentle pressure that ultimately caused that skull to grow wider and receded back.
That's fascinating. Fascinating. Well, please, if anyone has any questions. Yes, Tamara?
So is there any other literature or information that dives deeper in their spiritual beliefs or practices, aside from what we've learned tonight? Do we know if they worshiped a certain element or spirit, or is there even any information about that out there?
Well, I think there is. I'd have to go and check all my bibliographies, but what I was trying to relate is what the Spanish reported in their diaries. And they were observers for a short period of time. They came through here quickly. They were heading trying to find gold, and so the Tocobaga said, "Well, go north. Get out of here. We don't need you around us. We're living fine." And so ultimately, they ended up going, west and out, into the western part of the state. But no, there's not a lot of written on it. I'm sure that archaeologists some of them have specialized in their art. What did this art mean, and have meanings of it. But there was not a lot of documentation of Native American life and culture that, because they died off by the 1600s. And there might be some diary someplace that might have tried to record it, but then there was a language barrier. It's just a lot of what I'm saying is based on what archaeologists think, how they reacted and what they were doing. There was no scientists in there trying to document their life ways back in the 1500s. Later on, as academics moved into Native America, they tried to do all that, but that was well after the Tocobaga had already lost, let's say.
The Native American who had been a prisoner of the Tocobaga, who was taken back with the Spanish, was he asked about spirituality or their spiritual, how do we know about their shamans and everything like that?
Fontaneda, you'll have to go and he wrote a large diary when he got back to Spain. He was just a teenager, and he was an observer. He ultimately, I think, he learned their language, so he communicated. So that's very important. That if you're a soldier coming through an area and all you can do is sign language, you don't really learn much. And you're interested in going to find gold, not finding out their idiosyncrasies of religion. But the Fontaneda, who lived there 17 years, I'm sure he did. He's got the diary. You have to look him up. Probably in some library someplace, there's a reproduction of the Fontaneda diary, and you have to go through that to see if he did record that. But that would be a good source to check out. Yeah, I have not.
Can we put his name in the chat so that we can research?
Fernando de Escalante Fontaneda.
I'm assuming this is it. This is a document titled A Translation of Fontaneda,
Yes, that's it.
The captivity of, yes, this is it. This is another one. I see a PDF online. It is a document by Peter Ferdinando from the Florida Historical Quarterly of 2010, but you can download that there. Dr. Block's program notes contain his name as well, and that's where I listed the download resources in my Dropbox, and I'll put that in again. So all of this is in the chat. If for any reason you don't get it, you are welcome to email me. My email address is there, and I'll send you the link to his stuff, but it's all there. Well, I think your presentation has been quite fascinating. Roger, you've really covered so many aspects of the life, and I don't know about everybody else. I knew next to nothing about the Tocobaga. It's not one of the tribes we hear about a lot.
No.
They were part of the Mississippian culture. Are they the only members of the Mississippian culture that were this far south?
Of course, there was the Calusas. All of Mississippian culture was, as to that diagram shows, what existed through Florida, the southeast, as far west as Texas, and even up into Wisconsin. So, I mean, but those are all different tribal groups. But
Yes.
ultimately, those tribal groups evolved into what we'll call our Plains Indian, typical Sioux and Winnebago, and the Texas, the Western tribes too. So they all evolved from a Mississippian, let's say, early baseline.
If anyone would like to be in touch with you, are you comfortable sharing any contact information?
Email would be best, and then if they contact me, then we can do telephone and all that too.
All
But
right.
you can see I'm disappointed I'm not Native American, but I'm really still gung ho about that history and that culture. It is so interesting, and such a precious history of people here, and they're coming back. There's 3 million now in America supposedly, and they're a wonderful people. Terrific stuff.
Well, even though Ancestry.com or 123 whatever let you
23
down.
and me. 23 and me.
23 and me. Even though 23 and me let you down, still you've done the Native American culture proud, and maybe it's something in that Neanderthal history, but
That's where it is. It's all coming out of the Neanderthal kernel.
I think that's it. Or maybe the fact that that it isn't in your direct bloodline. It was something you wanted to know this time around. But I'm so glad you did, and it's been quite fascinating. And this has been a wonderful. And I know we're going to have you back in November. You're going to show us some of your artifacts.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and really talk about the individual artifacts, not just of the Tocobaga, but of Native American cultures in this.
For all Native America, yeah. Most of all my artifacts have been collected throughout the upper Midwest and the West, Plains Indian, and all of them have a real strong meaning to their culture. It just is phenomenal how they have developed that culture based on a naturalistic, environmental world of spirits. It's terrific stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. It's really been a most interesting program. I do want to plug our next month's program on Wednesday, August 18th, which is boat building on Florida's West Coast. And in a way, it goes hand in hand. A 7 millennia history. John Pether discussing boat building going back to the original native settlers of Florida over 7,000 years, but in particular coming up to the present and the museum that he is working to create in this region called the Gulf Coast Maritime Museum. And it will be very interesting with the history of boat building all across the west coast of Florida. So I look forward to that next month. That's Wednesday, August 18th. Our September program on September 22nd. that will be a program called Where is Palm Harbor and How Did It Grow, with Dr. Tom Rose. And he'll be talking about the development of Palm Harbor, not just from when it was Sutherland, but when it became Palm Harbor. And that will be an interesting history coming up on our September program. Bob, is there any last comment you wish to make for tonight?
No, just again, thank you very much. Wonderful program, Roger. And look forward to seeing you again soon. And I encourage anyone who gets a chance, you want to check with the Seminole Museum, because they're only open 2 Saturdays a month, but it's definitely worth the trip down there. It's a fascinating museum. So, and Joy, thank you for putting this all together. I appreciate it. And I thank everyone who's participated.
And please do visit our coming programs and become a member if you are not. We'd love to have you be a member.
And you can drop by anytime, Thursday through Saturday, 10 to 2. It's open, no reservations required.
Wonderful. And it's open to the public now by a donation basis at the moment.
Yes, correct.
So you are welcome to visit. We'd love to have you there. Thank you all for being with us. What a delight. We'll be editing this. Our programs are going in one at a time on YouTube, our past virtual programs. And what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy. Bye-bye now.
Good night, everyone.
Right.
Thank you again, Roger.
It was great. Thank you.